All right? That's if you mature. If you've been tested and you now, this is the approval of the test, okay? Then you get the crown as a result. So these are all financial terms. He's contrasting material wealth with spiritual wealth that's going to be very material in the eternal state. I mean, some people are going to rule whole planets, and it's not the Mormon thing at all. This has to do with the synergy of a society that has to be hierarchical, because not everybody's equal. We start out equal, but we don't use our spiritual provisions equally. Some of us will mature, and most of us don't. Okay, that's why the rapture hasn't happened yet, because everybody's decided to stay in the playpen in Christianity. Okay, so now we come down to our next use of the financial terms, and this particular one really surprised me. I didn't mention it in the videos before. Maybe I should call it up. James 1:18. Okay, this is going to be really important. Let me widen it so you can see the lexicon. Okay, this is Greek verb apokouo. Apokouo means it's a killer word. It comes from kuo, which means to be pregnant. Okay, that's the kind of production he's talking about, which, see, brought us forth by the word of truth. Remember, I said that was a synonym for birth, but it's more than that. It's the idea of being pregnant. It's the idea of producing a crop, right? Which, of course, we're looking at. It's a parallel. James is using it in parallel. This verse 15, let me show you. Okay? Same word, but with respect to sin. Okay? Well, it's a similar word, rather. I'm sorry. Okay? Versus God bringing us forth, producing. So that's why I colored it in green. All right, let me get this out of the way. It's talking about profit, fruit as people. Okay, again, that's Isaiah 53:10 and 11. The metaphor in Isaiah 53:11 is the Lord being pregnant with our sins. Okay, me'amal nafsho is the Hebrew. Mal is used for pregnancy. It's used for other kinds of labor too, but it's specifically for pregnancy labor. Okay, so that's considered a commercial thing, because obviously you produce crops too. So notice how he's tracking it. We started out up here, okay, unalloyed happiness, joy, being tested as a gemstone is tested, okay, resulting in a parallel to physical wealth, not having it or having it. And then he comes back to testing again, but this time it's the testing where it's approved. Your spiritual growth has made you so king-sized in your soul that you actually get a kingdom to rule. Okay, that's what the crown of life is about. You can find, there's a lot of places on the internet that teach about the doctrine of crowns. Most of them are Baptist churches. I want to say Travis Baptist Church taught it, but that was years ago when I happened to run across them on the internet. I'm not sure if they still teach it now. Okay, this is divine production of crops or people. Okay, being pregnant, cattle, all those things are commercial value. Okay, brought us forth. And then what brought us forth? The word of truth. That's Isaiah 53:11 again. Betato yatstik. Usually it's translated in English, I think, something like, by knowledge he justifies the many. Okay, and then you got first fruits. That's a real obvious one. First fruits is now what I want to bring up here, and I thought I made a note of it. I guess I didn't. Remember, he's talking to Jewish believers. First fruits was what we call Pentecost. All right. First fruits was actually the beginning, and then you count the 50 days at the end of which is Pentecost. That was always in the law, the eschatology of gathering the Gentiles, and it's still called gathering today in Judaism. The English translation of it, of the Hebrew, is usually rendered gathering on the internet. It means harvesting the Gentiles. Okay, so Christ is our first fruits. Okay, actually eat what we call Easter is really first fruits in Judaism. The Jews don't date their calendar rightly today, so they get the date wrong. They call it counting of the Omer today. But first fruits is the first day of that counting, and it really begins on the evening of the last night of Passover, last day of Passover at sundown. So first fruits is talking about the first fruits of the new harvest, which you can't eat the new harvest until you've dedicated, representative portion to God. It was a kind of income tax. Okay, but it has spiritual meaning too. So that's what first fruits means. Is again, we're looking at here production, commercial value, okay, production. And then here's first fruits in the Greek, aparkein. That's a clever word that he picked to use. But I don't have time to go into that. All right, so first fruits, again, you see the commercial ties? He's threading commercial words all the way through here, so that when you get into saving your soul, that's also a commercial term. All right? Because why? Because the profit is you. You are the first fruits, not what you do. The children are the fruit of the womb. All right? That's what the contract was in Isaiah 53:10. The people, not what they do. The people themselves are the fruit. So what needs to be saved? Well, what about the fruit of your thinking? Fruit in the Bible is always a product of thinking. Okay, Matthew 7 is about false teachers. Their fruit is a teaching. It's not talking about physical deeds. It's not talking about good deeds. It's talking about their teaching. I wish people would stop saying that business about, by their fruits you will know them. Because it's talking about teaching fruits. Not about whether or not you gave $5 to charity. I wish people would actually read the Bible before they quote it. Okay, so this is a commercial thing, because you are the fruit. See, God brought you forth by the word of truth. Well, where's the word of truth going to go but into your soul? And what does that do? That rescues you from your pre-salvation thinking. That rescues you from human thinking. That rescues you into God's thinking. Because what happened was, He brought us forth by the word of truth. That's a moniker of Christ. Isaiah 53:10. By knowledge He justifies. This is how it's usually translated in English. Bedato yadstik. That's how He saved us, was through His thinking truth. That's what Isaiah 53:11 flat tells you. He didn't save us by His physical death. He saved us by thinking truth. That's what the Isaiah 53:11 flat says. All right, so that same thing that happened to Him, the truth going in Him goes into you, and that's reflected later by Paul in Romans 5:5. So it's a commercial thing. It's not talking about salvation that gets you to heaven. It's talking about post-salvation epistemological rehabilitation, which is another word for, they used to call it in the 1930s, experiential sanctification. Okay, John Calvin will call it justification. He's wrong about that, using that term, but he's right about the process. Okay, you gradually get the word in you that replaces your bad thinking, and that's how you learn to stop sinning, but really that's how you learn to think like Christ does. That's the whole goal. Okay, so now it's a commercial thing to be a doer of the word. Okay, but how does a soul do anything? It has to believe. Okay? It has to believe the word. And that's the problem of the Jews, as I talked about in earlier videos. They were constantly mouthing the word, but they weren't doing it. Doing it doesn't necessarily mean doing good deeds. It means thinking. Now, obviously, if your thinking is right, your actions will be right. But if your thinking is wrong, you won't be right. And remember, the analogy I gave earlier was to the Muslims, who could very easily do good deeds and often do. Okay, but what word are they believing? They're believing the Quran. Well, then they're not doers of the word. They're doers of good deeds, just like the Pharisees were. But they're not doers here. Because why? Because they're not believing the word. They're not saved. They're doing lots of good works just like the Pharisees were. But they're not saved. But He's not talking about unsaved people. He's talking about us who are saved. Well, you can be saved and not be a doer of the word. Why? Because He says, not merely hearers who delude themselves. And so he's talking about the profit of believing in the Word, which is saving your soul one day at a time, precept on precept, as you learn and live on it. That's how you become a doer. And John will talk about the same thing when he talks about, he uses the same verb even, so maybe John's talking back to James 2. When John talks about practicing righteousness, he uses poete in the kaiosune.